When it comes to RPGs, few franchises evoke such deep emotions from gamers than the Elder Scrolls series. From its origins in the Elder Scrolls Arena in 1994 to one of the most acclaimed games of all time, Skyrim in 2011, and even reaching the clouds with the Elder Scrolls Online, there's a lot for us to talk about. The Elder Scrolls is a dense franchise. The quintessential spirit of the game was always to be this vast world for the player to explore and create their own stories, with minimal interference from the game itself and its designers. Bethesda Game Studios, then called Bethesda Softworks, wanted to give the player a sense of freedom, of mastering the world, your skills and abilities, in your own unique journey. As the manual for Daggerfall states, role-playing games are plays in which the stars are members of the audience. That is why the mainline Elder Scrolls series hooked so many players from the start. Even its roots in Arena 1994 were already audacious and ambitious, even though it had various technical and narrative limitations. It was way more ambitious than it could shape up to be in those days, but it ignited a franchise that stood the test of time, and even today, each new announcement of an Elder Scrolls game will usually stop the entire game community for a whole day. It's a beautiful thing to see how a game can be both inspired from what came before and itself inspire what comes after. In our episode number 1 of A Brief History of Video Games, we talked about Ultima and its major influence in the gaming world. Here in episode 2, we will see a lot of overlap across different franchises. After all, neither gaming nor game development are islands or a chapel atop of a mountain. On the contrary, it's a collective experience that we all share. And I think there's no better franchise to talk about that than the Elder Scrolls. Hey guys, it's Harry. I've been a game designer and producer for the past 11 years, and I'm super excited to continue making a brief history of video games here on the channel. As a game developer, I have deep respect and appreciation for the history of the medium. The video games industry is a solid 50 years old, and we've come very far. But if you think about it, it's like we're still in the 1940s of the film industry. Even though we went from wireframe graphics in mainframe computers to crazily realistic motion capture in a very short amount of time, I believe that humanity is still understanding what video games can be. Not long ago, people didn't think video games could tell deep stories or engage you in a more mature way. It was either seen as a childish activity or even worse, something that could harm children and incentivize violence. In our previous episode about Ultima, we saw how Richard Garriott, the legendary designer known as Lord British, during the development of Ultima 4 Quest of the Avatar, was starting to concern himself more with more philosophical questions when designing his games. He was thinking about what games could truly become, and what deep stories could be told, and immersive worlds that could be created. And this is going to be one of the epitomes of design for the Elder Scrolls series, to make sure that you as a player not only play as a character inhabiting a world, but you can live your own story within the world. You can really inhabit that as a true person. The Elder Scrolls series was one of the first, if not the first, to become a true open world experience, focusing a lot on its map design and letting the player explore all of the different towns and dungeons and quests. Every Elder Scrolls manual will tell you that the real story of the game is the one you create with your decisions in your own path. And that is an incredibly powerful premise for a game today as it was in 1994, when we started our journey with the Elder Scrolls Arena. Arena was very clearly inspired by Ultima Underworld, developed by Looking Glass Studios and published by Origin Systems in 1992. That's no secret, and Ted Peterson, writer and designer of Arena, Daggerfall, and Morrowind, is quick to recognize. And we can indeed see the major influence not only in the real-time 3D dungeons played from a first-person perspective, but also with the same movement style and action commands present in the Underworld games. That is more than natural, because Ultima Underworld: The Stygian Abyss presented groundbreaking technology and engine that would influence many games to come. But while the Underworld series underperformed the rest of the mainline Ultima games, here with the Elder Scrolls, the first-person technology and gameplay would achieve completely new heights. But that would not come at first. While a lot of people praised Arena and what it intended to be, the game still lacked much polish and was released with several bugs, which resulted in a modest level of success for the publisher. The game still presented the player with a big world, several towns and villages to explore, a considerably complex character system that allowed you to pick from 8 different races, including the iconic Argonians, the famous reptile race from the series, and a dozen of character classes condensed into 3 categories: mages, warriors, and thieves. The game manual explains to the player everything that they need to know in order to start the game and build your character, something expected by a player in 1994 and even beyond, as most of the game's systems were only explained in the manual, together with Tamriel's lore, the world of the Elder Scrolls. One interesting note about Arena's character classes and how the dungeons are developed is what the manual itself tells you, that spellcasters will have an easier time beating the dungeons than warrior classes, and it goes to say that if you want a more challenging experience from the game, you can play a non-spellcasting class. Naturally, this is because a mage can cast spells far away from enemies and kill them before they can even reach you. If you think about it, you can trace an interesting parallel with more modern games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring that also have the same characteristic. These games are notoriously easier, well, if you dare call Dark Souls easy, when you have a spellcaster that can kill most enemies from a distance. Some concepts in game design are so pervasive that they will hardly change even decades apart. That is elegant design. The combat system also borrows the dynamic mouse movement to orient the attack that Ultima Underworld introduced. But Arena allows you to swing your sword or axe in 5 different motions: vertical, horizontal, diagonal, and a thrust attack. While not super practical, this helped give more immersion to the game, a design technique called mapping. What the player does in the real world converts directly into the screen. So if a player swings the mouse in a vertical motion, the character makes a vertical attack. This technique helps players connect with the game world and is also widely used in product design, in things like the control knobs on your stove. The top right knob controls the top right burner, and so on. That is mapping, and we see that all the time in games as well. Designers are always looking for opportunities to teach the player in the most natural way possible, minimizing the need of extensive tutorials. The game also presents live-action cutscenes in an attempt to produce more realistic storytelling. Curiously enough, that technique fell out of use as technology advanced, giving place to 3D renders. A lot would change with the series' second installment, Daggerfall, in 1996. What Arena was simply aiming to become, Daggerfall would make a reality in many ways. Daggerfall used the X-Engine 3D that Bethesda had developed for 2 Terminator games that the company worked on. PC Gamer's review at the time gave Daggerfall a solid 89 score and highlighted the sheer size and freedom to explore the world as a key selling point, but also pointing out its aging graphics, even for the time. But Daggerfall presented many innovations, a new leveling system that focusing on developing individual skills rather than character attributes, which would become one of the long-lasting designs for the franchise in a huge world full of possibilities for the player to explore. Daggerfall lets you choose the tone in which you talk to NPC characters, among polite, normal, or blunt. Towns will be closed by nightfall, and in my particular gameplay, when I reached the city of Daggerfall, I learned that the king had passed a new law prohibiting vagrancy on streets. The level of detail is mind-blowing even for today's standards. Well, you're then invited to correctly interpret the meaning of the new law, which I didn't. I insisted on making camp in the city to pass time until the next morning, only to be harassed and arrested by a city guard for infringing the vagrancy law. I paid 80 coins in a fine and got released the next day. That is Daggerfall. Many consider Daggerfall the best in the series. That's a bold claim when you have Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim as successors, but after playing Daggerfall you can see why that would be. The world feels fresh, interesting, with so many characters to talk to, so many different dialogue options, it's crazy. The same way your character has the full world of Tamriel to explore and engage with, you as a player have the game systems to discover and master. I got myself curious trying to explore all of the dialogue options, questions, and tones of voice, just to see where the game would take me. And Daggerfall, or any game in the mid-90s for that matter, will not hold your hand very long. You do get some helpful tutorial prompts here and there, and the manual is always a big help for character creation and quest development, but the game will ask of you to really be cunning with your actions and decisions in the game, which is pretty refreshing going back in time to play it. In character creation, Daggerfall gives you the option of directly choosing your character class or answering a list of 10 moral questions in order to define your class. If you watch my previous History of Ultima video, you know that's borrowed directly from Ultima 4 Quest of the Avatar, which popularized this mechanic of answering moral questions for character creation, and a lot of games made use of it. The game provides you a plethora of choices for character classes, including not only the classical fantasy barbarian, rogue, and mage, but also battle mage, spell sword, monk, bard, and much more. And then, towns. Lots of towns for you to explore, and quests to complete, and characters to talk to. Daggerfall is a truly massive game, and as a developer myself, it is incredibly impressive that the game developers were able to pull off a game of such scope as an RPG. Bethesda took nearly 3 years to complete Daggerfall, starting shortly after the release of Arena in 1994. The game has no rigid main quest, even though there is a central plotline. It leads the player throughout the beginning of the game in the initial dungeon where the player first finds themselves in, but after that you are pretty much free to explore as you please, take the quests that you want, and overall create your own personal journey with the game, which is exactly the vision Bethesda wanted to convey to the player. The game gives you some starting context that the 21st Emperor of Tamriel, Uriel Septim VII, tells you that his loyal subject, King Lysandus of Daggerfall, was killed in battle and his soul was somehow cursed and could not be put to rest. You are commanded to uncover the reason why, together with a lesser quest of destroying a mysterious personal ladder from the Emperor himself to Lysandus' queen, Minisera. That gives you enough context to be put into the world and decide how to progress on your journey. But in the end, Daggerfall is much more about the character system and how you as a player choose to explore the world than it is about the plot itself. The main storyline is mostly an excuse for you to immerse yourself in this world and start acting as a real character inside it, with real stakes. But for modern players who hadn't enjoyed Daggerfall upon launch, playing the game today might be a challenge. Even though I did choose the vanilla GOG version of the game to experience it firsthand, for a more modern audience wishing to take the best out of the game, there are several mods and patches that you can use to modernize the graphics and interface. Probably the most common I've seen online is Daggerfall Unity, created by Daggerfall Workshop in the Unity engine to provide much better support for modern hardware and graphics, some much needed bug fixes, and quality of life improvements to the game. You can Google Daggerfall Unity and install the application to play it. Or if you're feeling particularly hardcore like myself, you can play the vanilla version on GOG and still have a good time. I know that having quality of life improvements is a great thing, but I also enjoy experiencing the game as close as possible to the original release, to get to know the gameplay and interface of the good old days. Daggerfall was followed by Elder Scrolls Legend Battlespire in 1997 for the MS-DOS, the first spin-off out of the mainline series. The game box literally came with a letter from Bethesda's founder, Christopher Weaver, telling the players to manage their expectations with the game, because that was not the true sequel to Daggerfall, and Morrowind was still releasing in 1998, Or at least that's what the letter said, which we'll get to in a minute. The game is a much more straightforward, simplified, and linear version of Daggerfall. Many of the more intricate systems were reduced or removed, and clearly the game was more of an opportunity to explore different designs and also to keep the players busy while the next official entry to the series was not ready. Battlespire still offers you some decent level of character creation customization, allowing you to pick from a pre-existing list of 6 races and 12 preset classes, but you're also able to create a custom class. The game will allow you to distribute character points across several primary, major, and minor skills, as well as spells depending on your class choice. One uncommon feature in the character creation screen is the ability to choose advantages and disadvantages, which are perks that will either enhance your character's skills or give you restrictions in exchange for build points. I've rarely seen this in RPGs, maybe the perk system in Fallout is a good comparison, but I'm quite familiar with this feature from the tabletop RPG GURPS, created by Steve Jackson. This gives you a very interesting nuance when creating a character, so that's definitely an interesting point for Battlespire. One bold addition to Battlespire was the inclusion of multiplayer scenarios, which tried to increase the replayability of the game via LAN connection or the internet. There you could play deathmatch, cooperative, and even team games, in a clear attempt to capitalize on online communities that were growing very strong at the time. All in all, Battlespire tried to do some interesting things, but fell short overall in delivering the Elder Scrolls experience, even for a simplified version. And if players were expecting Morrowind by 1998, what they truly got was the Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard, developed and published by Bethesda Softworks, but this time it was not even trying to be an RPG. Redguard is an action-adventure game with linear, story-driven gameplay, which for the first time in the series was fully in third person. While not particularly well received, being released with a myriad of bugs, clunky camera movement, and a very questionable direction for voice acting, both Redguard and Battlespire were important experiments that would educate the rest of the series, like the Elder Scrolls' signature real-time switch between first and third-person perspectives. In Redguard you play as Cyrus, a mercenary working for a Khajiit crime boss named Surantra. Cyrus receives an intriguing letter from his old mentor Tobias and must sail to the city of Stros Makai to find out about his missing sister. The game settings and art direction resembles a lot more of classic swashbuckler and pirate novels than a medieval fantasy game usually would. It feels more Pirates of the Caribbean than Lord of the Rings. But Battlespire and Redguard struggled on sales and with critics. 2 failed releases in a row, but Bethesda in a very difficult position, facing the risk of bankruptcy. In truth, that is mostly the case even today. If a game company has 2 or 3 poor performing games in a row, that is already a high risk of going out of business. The games industry doesn't allow much room for failure, despite what isolated indie success stories might tell. That is why so many established companies decide not to take so much risk and release things that they already know are going to sell well. Luckily for Bethesda, their next game would change the history of the company itself, of the franchise, and in a way, of the entire RPG genre. The Elder Scrolls Morrowind was released in 2002 and brought several innovations to the series, like the seamless switch between first and third person we already mentioned, but also a lot more. Bethesda had clearly learned from the mistakes they made with Battlespire and Redguard to create an Elder Scrolls game that many consider to be simply the best in the series, or even more, the best RPG ever created. And you can really see it all coming together here. A massive world, huge freedom in how you approach your character creation, in which you can answer the already established set of questions to get your character class, picking from a pre-existing list of 21 classes, or even creating your custom one. And as expected of an RPG from the 90s or early 2000s, the game itself will not thoroughly explain to you how the different attributes and classes and races behave. You have to look up the game's manual for that. But the complexity of the systems in a full-blown RPG is all there, several character attributes and stats, race and class combinations that you can try, tons of armor and weapon classes with different types of attack, including Trust, Chop, and Slash, with each weapon usually having one stronger attack type. And naturally, you perform the different types of attack by moving your mouse vertically or horizontally, like you did in Daggerfall. Not only that, but the leveling system is more robust here. You continue to level up your skills by using them in the game. To increase your stealth skill, you need to sneak around a lot. Attacking with different types of weapons will also enhance your ability with that specific gear. But you can also find characters that will train you, improving your abilities if you're willing to toss up the coin for it. Or you might learn new skills by reading a book, just like in real life. Well, sort of. The game puts you in control of your character before even picking your race and class, which will come after a few minutes of gameplay. That puts the player in the middle of the action, learning the first controls and movement without concerning too much about character creation, which is an interesting technique for reinforced immersion. We all know that the first 30 minutes or even a full hour in many RPGs is spent in the character creation screen. There are those nerds who enjoy it, myself included, but many people will appreciate Morrowind's approach to let you start playing with your character and talking to NPCs right off the bat. And dialogue options are plenty. Just like Daggerfall, you can talk to NPCs about the most diverse topics, and as you explore the dialogue, more options arise, incentivizing you to dive deep and listen to what the NPCs have to say. Some very interesting questions you can usually ask people you encounter in the game include asking for a little advice that always gives you a hint on how to play the game itself, what items to carry, or how to improve your skills. You can also ask about a little secret to most people you talk with, trying to get some dirty hidden pieces of information that characters might be willing to share with you. All of this means that Morrowind not only invites you to explore the world itself, every town and every dungeon that might guard treasures and foes alike, but also to explore the people, their stories, agendas, and inside quests they might have. And when you start talking with people in your starting town of Seydanin, you are told that folks will not immediately like you and perform any deeds for you. You need to first earn their trust, maybe complete a quest or two for them before you start winning the favors from the natives. That's Elder Scrolls guiding you through the initial parts of the game. As a matter of fact, an afternoon session playing Morrowind can be more about diving into the dialogue options and some town quests than going about and killing monsters. You can see that Bethesda went all in with Morrowind. After all, this was probably their last shot to stay in business and continue making an impact in games history. Morrowind was a massive success, selling 4 million copies by the end of 2005 and cementing the newly created Bethesda Game Studios, which was now separated from the publisher Bethesda Softworks, as a master of the craft. Morrowind was also the first game in the series which Todd Howard, the now famous director, got to lead. He is mentioned as project leader in Morrowind's credits, together with Ken Ralston as lead designer and Craig Walton as lead programmer. Morrowind takes you to the island of Vardenfell, home to the Dark Elves of the world, or Dunmer as they call themselves. The plot will take you to uncover several mysteries related to the Dunmer traitor Dagoth Ur, who had been previously defeated and deemed dead, but actually survived and, as every worthy villain, prepared his malevolent comeback. One thing that really impressed players and critics about Morrowind's world and setting was its art direction. It's not your usual medieval fantasy world. Things feel different, they look different. There are these giant mushrooms serving as trees on the roadside, and giant insects that carry you around for fast travels. The Dunmer people live in bug-shell-shaped houses and wear bug shells as armor. The style is quite intriguing and leaves you wondering how this world fits together. That is definitely part of the appeal and something quite unique in the game world. Todd Howard describes the success of Morrowind and onward as the second phase of Bethesda. It's when the company really reached for new heights. And as we were fully entering the 2000s and more players were joining the gaming community every year, Bethesda was becoming truly mainstream, and their next game would benefit from all of it. The Elder Scrolls Oblivion released in 2006 for Windows, Xbox 360, and PlayStation 3, and it took 4 years under development. It was the company's first true experience developing for consoles at launch, and it led them into a whole new mindset when approaching controls, interface, and accessibility. That would pose a lot of new challenges that the company would need to overcome. And in regards to the art direction, when put side by side with Morrowind, Oblivion was certainly a step into a more traditional medieval fantasy setting. And it makes sense in the world of Tamriel with so many different regions and provinces, from Morrowind to Oblivion to Skyrim. Each one can have their own separate, unique art direction and characteristic and feel. Here you have a more clear and compelling main quest. You need to find the hidden heir to Tamriel's throne and close the gates of Oblivion, from where demons have been spawning and causing havoc upon the world. Here you traverse the Imperium province known as Cyrodiil, home to the Imperial human race. But once more, as well established at this point in the game's manual, the main goal of Oblivion is to leave you in peace to play at your own pace, pursue your own quests, and be your own character. Here, Bethesda's Radiant AI system drives the behavior of Cyrodiil's citizens and guards with whom you can speak or simply observe go by their own path. A potent AI system used to breathe life into a vast game world filled with people and character. NPCs have their own agendas, concerns, and routines, not unlike what we have seen in Ultima on episode number 1 of our History of Video Games series, but now at a much larger scale and with fully realized 3D characters. But then, in classic Bethesda fashion, you can totally ignore the main quest and pursue your own journey, become whatever type of hero or anti-hero you want to be, join a diverse set of guilds, and even rise to the top of the ranks. You can become a vampire of all things, which according to the game's guide, opens up entire new ways of playing the game. If you want to do so, you need to first find a vampire for you to fight with, and hope that you contract a disease from the wounds called porphyric hemophilia, or the vampire disease. You will at first simply notice a slight drain on your fatigue bar. If you wish to treat it, you can use a spell or potion and it will cure it. If you do nothing, however, you will after 3 days be completely drained, and the next time you sleep, you will wake up as a creature of the night, having to consume blood to survive, being afraid of the sun and fire, but on the other hand much more powerful, with bonuses to strength, willpower and speed, as well as bonuses to skills, including acrobatics, destruction, mysticism, and more. You also get some special powers like the things you've come to expect from classic vampiric folklore, including being able to charm and manipulate other people to do what you want. It's incredible that Bethesda really goes the extra mile to fulfill their own design mantra of offering you almost endless possibilities. The level of detail and effort put into the towns of Cyrodiil is like nothing else the series had ever seen. Each town was carefully crafted to tell a story, to create a believable, inhabitable environment for the player and the NPCs who lived in it. To generate massive landscapes with different types of terrains and trees, Bethesda created a more procedural system to try and save some time, but the quality wasn't very good, so the artists spent the next 2 years modifying the procedural landscape to feel more handcrafted and relevant. A massive undertaking. Oblivion received a remastered version in 2025, which was quite well received. Updated graphics, support for modern hardware, and interface improvements came with it. Oblivion sold 9.5 million copies worldwide. In 2025, the remake is going strong with 1.5 million units sold already, plus whatever many hours people are spending on the Xbox Game Pass. But that would all pale in comparison to the next entry of the Elder Scrolls series, Skyrim, which was released in 2011 and would go on to sell over 60 million copies worldwide, counting several different editions and DLCs, with the most recent one being the Anniversary Edition in 2021. And with the recent announcement of the release for the Nintendo Switch 2, Bethesda is not done with it quite yet. By this time, Bethesda was already an expert in open-world first-person RPGs. The journey that started in 1994 with The Elder Scrolls Arena was now reaching its full maturity. There's no right or wrong when approaching game development, I mean, as long as it's working for the team. Many teams want to build different types of games and experiences and challenge themselves in different ways. And that's totally fine. But I'm really a fan of mastering the craft and polishing the production process of a single line of games. We see that with Supergiant, creators of Bastion and Hades. We've seen that with BioWare, makers of Dragon Age and Mass Effect, which are third-person action RPG experiences that rely on character development, storytelling, dialogue, and tactical combat. We have seen that with Larian, the studio behind Baldur's Gate 3 and several other CRPGs. And with Bethesda Game Studios, when they are not developing another Elder Scrolls game, it might be a Fallout game, also a first-person, open-world RPG. Many people may think that by focusing on a single line of game or genre, the studio and the team might become stale or bored. But I'd say it's the other way around. The more comfortable you get with the process, with a specific type of development, the more you can get creative in how you approach it. And with Skyrim, it was just like that. They already had a process figured out, even though not perfect. Their games would usually start with a map. And they already knew the general map of Tamriel, but now they would design the biting cold north of Skyrim in more vivid detail. Not unlike what J.R.R. Tolkien did for Lord of the Rings, or George Martin with the Game of Thrones. A lot of these stories are held together by the map, the geography that ties the relationships between different cities, dynasties, and characters together. You can understand the movement across the map and the flow of the story overall. Many professional writers would say that this is a great way to start your story when creating epic novels. So Bethesda started there, with the map of Skyrim, first on paper and then on the engine, just the baseline for the terrain and different parts of the province, understanding the ebbs and flows of the North World and the different types of snow. After all, how do you make sure that an open world game fully set up in a snow world will not become tedious and monotonous? But hey, there's all kinds of snow and land and rivers and mountains and towns that you can create. This time around though, they didn't want to go with a more mainstream fantasy world from Oblivion, but also not quite so crazy alien like Morrowind. With a northern setting, it made sense to create something more grounded, heavily inspired by Norse mythology. Once again, different parts of Tamriel gave the team the freedom to explore all kinds of environment and storytelling. Oh, and dragons. The main plot would be focused on dragons. Maybe nowadays the world has seen one too many dragons, be it killing them or having a conversation with them on a pile of gold, or training them for you and your friends to mount, a bit of everything. But in 2011, it made a lot of jaws drop. The visuals were stunning. The scale of the dragons viewed from your tiny perspective on the ground, trying to survive and run away at the start of the game, but then building your way up to mastering them and slaying them with your bare hands or magic was something else. To create, according to an IGN reviewer at the time, one of the most fully realized, easily enjoyable, and utterly engrossing role-playing games ever made. The dragons in Skyrim are not simply big bosses for you to defeat. They also tie the design together with the new shouting system, which is a roster of special abilities that you get from slaying dragons that do not need a specialized build. Any character can benefit from the shouts, and it also ties the main storyline in which you are a dragonborn, in whose veins flows dragon blood. So the game wants to give you a more permanent incentive to pursue and kill the many dragons in Skyrim. You know, if killing freaking gigantic flying reptiles is not incentive enough for you. And the world design and dungeon design would be more organic in Skyrim as well, with less 90-degree angles like Oblivion had. After all, this was now 2011, not 2006 anymore, so the game engine became more and more robust, more performant, allowing the team to play with different shapes and sizes for the world. Skyrim is also a lot more organic in character creation. You don't spend attribute points or skill points on your character from the start. Some attributes are gone altogether, like endurance and intelligence. So are skills like acrobatics, which could lead to some exploits in previous games when maxed out. Here, you simply choose your character's race with the respective bonuses that could help in some builds, but there's no defined character classes. Skyrim invites you to be completely free in this world and develop the skills you want and the quests that you want, because every part of each town or forest might give you something interesting to do or to pursue. It is truly the ultimate design goal from the Bethesda team, you creating the story you want to play. And we cannot talk about Skyrim without talking about the mods. The modding community was definitely one of the largest, if not the largest, of any RPG. Any mod that you can possibly imagine, there's certainly one for Skyrim. The game editor was already present in previous Bethesda games, but in Skyrim, they would really flourish, and that is a big part of what kept the game alive for so long, being made fresh by the community itself. And even several of those mods made their way to the base game upon the release of the Anniversary Edition in 2021. The Elder Scrolls series is something impossible to replicate. Its success and influence in the world of gaming and beyond cannot be understated. Each entry in the series expanded on the design philosophy Bethesda wanted to solidify, and Arena, Daggerfall, Morrowind, and Oblivion were all big steps into a fully consolidated vision. It is incredibly rare that a game studio can produce success after success like that, even with some bumps on the road like they had with Redguard and Battlespire. For me as a game developer, I can draw some important lessons from Bethesda's history with the Elder Scrolls. Having a strong design philosophy and keeping true to it along the years, while the team continually masters the craft of creating that kind of experience they want to create. It is something truly inspiring. The next major Elder Scrolls game would not be a sequel to Skyrim at all, but an MMORPG. The Elder Scrolls Online, released in 2014, developed by ZeniMax Online Studios and published by Bethesda Softworks. So this is not a Bethesda Game Studios title, and it would initially show. At the same time trying to be an authentic Elder Scrolls experience, while on the other hand having to live up to the other MMO standards, The Elder Scrolls Online fell short on both. Critics were harsh with it initially, saying that the game did not offer the free open-world experience that was now the hallmark of the franchise. An MMORPG has a very different kind of balance than a single-player game, and so the ZeniMax team was very constrained in their design. Due to the development and timeline constraints, the game didn't even initially allow you to switch to a first-person view, which was also a given in The Elder Scrolls by now. However, over time, the game suffered a major graphics overhaul, along with the much-wanted first-person perspective option and many more improvements. So much was done with it that was enough for the critics and players alike to change their minds about the game in a significant way. And as such, the game continues to receive patches and updates even today, which is an incredible feat. And what about The Elder Scrolls 6? It's been 7 years since the first announcement of The Elder Scrolls 6 teaser. 7 long years to lifetime fans of the series. But we know how AAA development continues to escalate, taking longer and longer for games to be made. To be honest, the difference is mostly when they decide to first announce the new game. Do they leave players hanging without even knowing whether the next game is happening at all? There are several implications of this, even for the internal development team. Imagine working on a game for 7 years without being able to tell anybody that it's happening. For us game developers, at least making people aware that a new game is under development already gives the team a big morale boost and also a sense of accountability that they have something real that's been announced to the world. But the other side of that coin is that you leave players 7 years and counting without major news or any slight glimpse of a release date for the game, and that naturally generates all kinds of bad publicity. You know, it's a pick your poison kind of situation. There's not much way around that. And as I think that for Bethesda, canceling The Elder Scrolls 6 is not an option, it's just about burning as much fuel and dollars as possible to deliver a global hit, which, believe it or not, is not guaranteed even for this big, established publishers spending hundreds of millions of dollars to make a game. At this point, much more than a Hollywood blockbuster film. And there you have it, a brief history of the Elder Scrolls series all the way from its origins in 1994 with Arena, very directly inspired by Ultima Underworld, to exploring all of the depths and heights of Tamriel and its many provinces and cities. The Elder Scrolls is a legendary franchise that forever defined the RPG genre. Any game trying to create a meaningful and emergent RPG experience or first-person game focused on character development, lore, and freedom will necessarily be inspired by The Elder Scrolls. It's a must-play for any RPG fan, and it's great to see that the franchise is not only alive today, but also continues to be one of the most awaited games of modern days. What that tells me is that even though the market and gaming community evolve over time, some things never change. There's always more players wanting to live that epic, incredibly free experience and inhabit a world so full of possibilities and choices that many times only you get to live. With games like The Elder Scrolls and its emergent gameplay, it's not an overstatement to say that some experiences within the game will be very particular to you, and I believe that makes up a lot of the appeal that the franchise has with old audiences and new ones. Alright, that was a brief journey throughout the history of Bethesda Game Studios and the Elder Scrolls series. Now I want to hear from you. What is your favorite Elder Scrolls game? What was the first game that hooked you into the world of Tamriel? I'd love to hear more about your experience with the Elder Scrolls and also about other classic games that you want to see here on the channel. So make sure to hit subscribe, leave a comment below, and I'll catch you guys next time.